Hey guys, Dark Skeleton here, and today we're taking a look at two new cards from the Blackrock Mountain Adventure set. First up, we're going to have Lava Shock, which is the Shaman class card from the set. For 2 mana, you deal 2 damage, but it also has a very unique ability to unlock all of your overloaded mana crystals. Something you should know about the Shaman class is a lot of its best cards, such as Spirit Wolves and Lightning Storm, actually overload the Shaman. Although you get a lot of power on the turn you play them, it can completely screw over your mana curve for future turns. With this card, you can eliminate those penalties in a manner that is kind of akin to playing an Innervate on your future turn. Now by itself, a 2 mana 2 damage removal spell is actually pretty lame. That's worse than Demon Fire. So really this card is worth playing if you have another overload card to go with it. So it's not so much an early game removal card as it is a mid or late game combo card. And the more overload cards you play in a turn, the more value you're going to get out of this card's effect. For instance, if you did something like play a Spirit Wolves on turn 8, followed by a Lightning Storm, which overloads you for 4, and then with your last 2 mana you play the Lava Shock, you deal 2 damage, maybe take something out, and then your future turn you've effectively just innervated twice with the same card. I can't say for sure, but this card also has the potential to make certain really bad cards like Forked Lightning actually a little bit more valuable. Forked Lightning, of course, for 1 mana, you get to deal 2 damage to 2 random enemy minions, but it overloads you for 2. Because of that overload, it's considered a bad card, but if you're able to remove the overload with a Lava Shock, dealing 2 damage to 2 targets for 1 mana is actually pretty dang strong. Whether this card gets played at all is going to depend on how many overload cards you have in a deck, and as well as how important the mana curve is for your playstyle. Decks that need huge tempo swings to maintain their board control, like those running Lightning Storm and Flametongue Totems, may want to include this card, which would pretty much be all of the Shaman decks at this point. But the thing that keeps this card from being game-breakingly good is, A, it depends on you having those other cards to kind of combo with it, and 2, it's not the same as Innervate. It will restore your mana back to the original amount, but it's not going to put you way over the edge where you can just drop something ridiculous on the field like a Druid can playing the Innervate card. Overall though, I'd say it's a pretty cool situational card. I definitely think some decks will see it. I don't believe it's going to be in every single one. And that's good. That's what I want to see in cards for this game. The next card that we have available is the Axe Flinger, a warrior minion that costs 4 mana and has 2 fight for stats, which is normally bad, but like I always say, it always goes back to that effect that he has. So whenever this minion takes damage, it deals 2 damage to your enemy hero. What immediately comes to mind is that this card will be strong in aggressive decks that are trying to burst your opponent down before you run out of steam, and also decks that play a lot of Death Spites and Whirlwinds. Enrage and Bouncing Blade may also be some pretty good cards to play with this. The more you can get this guy to take damage, the more free damage you get off on your opponent. If you can ever proc this guy more than once, that's a lot of free damage. 4 free damage? A Lepronome only gives 2, and that's if the Death Rattle effect procs. Even if your opponent has immediate removal from their hand, most removal does do damage of some kind. There's only a few cards that you would really want to use on a guy like this that don't do damage. For instance, Shadowward Pain. But cards like Assassinate, you don't want to use a 5 mana spell on a 4 mana minion. This guy's weakness is probably going to be really big minions on your opponent's side of the board that just run into this guy and kill it for basically free, since it only has 2 base attack. Cards like a Nubar Ambusher or a Piloted Sky Golem come to mind. But as I mentioned, this card is going to be played in more aggressive warrior decks, so if you're getting to the point where your opponent's just dropping Sky Golems and other big things on the field, then you just gotta go to your opponent's face and not really worry about their ability to trade effectively with you. Another thing you can do with this guy is if your opponent has a weak minion on the board, such as a 3/2, then you can run this guy in, it'll survive, and you get to deal 2 damage to your opponent's face anyway. As long as you can keep this guy alive after it takes a little bit of damage, there's a lot of options for exploiting its survival on the field as a warrior. For instance, Battle Rage is an amazing card draw mechanic if you can keep 2 or 3 weakened minions on the field. Commanding Shout is also a potential option, being able to milk another trade off of this guy, keep him at 1 HP, and then your opponent still has to remove him and take an additional 2 damage to his face. The main problem with a lot of those warrior decks that are very aggressive and rely on enrage mechanics, though, is that they require a bunch of setup, and if your opponent is able to control your field tightly, then it's more than likely you're just going to run out of steam, and that's why most warriors currently just play the very control-y decks. However, I do see this card with a lot of potential, and when you mix this in with cards like Bouncing Blade and Death's Bite, some of the new cards they've been adding, the thought of an aggressive warrior deck is seeming more and more viable. I know that there's a couple that have made it to Legend, but maybe we'll start to see a few more after this. Of course, playing this card in a control deck as well isn't completely out of the question, because as a control warrior, you do eventually need to get your opponent down into the range where you can burst them with Grimoire Hellscream. However, usually you just do that with Alexstrasza and other big legendaries at the end of the game, and I don't think this card really would fit in a control deck. It's already so tight for the cards you choose, but it's not out of the question. But yes, for aggressive warrior decks, especially when you combine this with the other cards they're adding in, like the Grim Patron, I definitely see some kind of Dark Iron Dwarf aggressive warrior deck being a real possibility. These two cards are really interesting. They're not overpowered, but they do have the potential to be really good in certain decks. So far, I think Blizzard's doing a great job with this set of cards. So I've been Dark Skeleton, thank you for watching. If you want to see more of the Blackrock Mountain Adventure card first impressions, go ahead and subscribe, and I will see you all next time.